tell when you look at that. The pace of this adventure has just been kicked up another gear. It's 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning in June, and I've driven for a little less than an hour from Newcastle out into Northumberland so I can hike the Simonside Hills. My plan is to start here at this car park. I'm then going to follow the road northwest for around 1.4 kilometres where I'll cross a cattle grid. Just beyond that point I'm going to leave the road and join a small trail that runs parallel to it. That trail will deliver me to Simonside Car Park, and from there I'll join a fire road that leads west and up into the forest. I'll follow that fire road until I reach a fork near a mast, and at that fork I'm going to bear right. A little over half a kilometre later and I'll come to another fork. This time I'm going to bear left. Here the road starts to climb again and swings around towards the south. It won't be long before that climb levels out and I begin the approach to Simonside North Face. There's plenty of climbing here, but because of its northerly aspect it's often in shadow, so it gets most of its visitors in the warmer months. When I reach the foot of the crag I'm going to make a short but quite steep ascent to the summit cairn, and from there I'll be following the ridge of the Simonside Hills. This section is the highest on the route and has some of the most interesting features, but it's also the most exposed. Aside from that, this is also the return leg and will bring me about 3 kilometres east back towards the starting point. All in all, I'm expecting to be moving for around 3 hours, but with stops it'll obviously take longer. This is a beautiful part of Northumberland. I'm a little bit south of Rothbury, and this is a beautiful walk to go on. But this part of it, on this tarmac road, is the least interesting part for me, and I'm sure it will be for a lot of other people as well. The more interesting bits come later on when you work your way up into the forest and eventually out onto the top of the Simonside Hills. Part of the reason that I'm here this early is because it is really popular and it's a Saturday today, so with the weekend and the reasonable weather it's going to be pretty busy later on, and this place is fantastic and it looks much better without other people in it, if I'm honest, hanging around taking selfies and just generally being in the landscape. And that's a bit hypocritical. I mean, I know I'm here to enjoy it and everybody else can as well, but for me it's a bit nicer when it's more peaceful. It's a little bit hard to see because of all the new trees that are right in front of us, but behind those on the hillside there is a lot of windfall. I mean, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of trees that have come down, and that's the same story all throughout this forest. It's a real shame as well because places like this do get a lot of visitors. Places like Kielder and Thrutton Woods, and a lot of places like that have got mountain bike trails and walking trails, and it means that a large part of those have been closed. I mean, a lot of them are open now, but there's still some areas where you can't go, and some parts of the forests which won't be the same again for a really long time. I like to start this route on the road, and that way I can finish on a descent to the car park rather than a climb. Thankfully, it doesn't take long to reach the cattle grid, and from that point it's all off-road. I've just left the road, and this little overgrown trail runs right next to it. The road's just across to my right-hand side, but this is going to take us to the main car park at Simonside, and I've got to say today it's closed, and that is probably due largely to the amount of fallen trees in the forest. Also some harvesting operations that are going on. It's definitely a lot more sheltered in here, a lot less wind, much nicer. This isn't the first time that I've come across a deer when I've been out, but it is one of the few times that I've managed to be able to capture one on camera. Right, so this is the car park, and I can see up on the hill there has been a lot of harvesting work going on. It's through the trees there are lots and lots of logs stacked all along the forest road. I'm heading out of the car park on a grid bearing of 285 degrees. I've just left the car park. You might be able to see it over my right shoulder. I'm starting to climb up towards the mast, and I was here maybe a month ago, and the amount of fallen trees off behind us there was unreal. There were so many, but there's so much work that's gone on to try and harvest those. You can see just how many logs they've produced from it. It's amazing how walking uphill can get you warmed up. This is my first fork, and yeah, I'm going to go right, and just to confirm my position, I should have a mast on my right hand side, which I do. So away we go. That in front of us is the forest road, and it's been blocked behind us. That's the direction that I've come from, by 2 or 3 trees down there. And what's happened is people have still been coming here, and they've been circumnavigating the trees, and they've created a kind of new pathway around them, because there are quite a lot of trunks across the road. So I'm just going to skip round here on the left hand side. This looks like it's an old vehicle track, probably from harvesting. So at this point we're back onto the road. Still plenty of trees around. No doubt the crews that have been clearing up the windfall lower down the hill will make it here eventually, but the storms brought so many trees down, it's probably going to take them a little time to get this far. It's like a bit of a slalom. For me, it's a bit sad to see what's happened here. I know this is a commercially operated forest, and a lot of these trees would have been harvested sooner or later, but this level of destruction is something that I've not seen in nature. You might say that all's not lost. The forest will be replanted, and in a few decades it'll be thriving again, or that this is an opportunity for new growth that will help to sustain wildlife, but there's just so much that has been lost, it's a lot to come to terms with. Seeing the forest in this state is disheartening, but being able to access wild places like this one is still a real privilege. As far as walking this route goes, if I had to make an estimate based on the map and what I can see on the ground, I'd say that there's between 200 and 300 metres of this fire road that's been blocked. It's still passable, but there are a couple of points that could be quite risky, so I'd suggest waiting until the road has been cleared before planning a visit. This obviously hasn't deterred a lot of people from coming here. People are still getting out and enjoying the forest. I suppose this is a bit of a spectacle as well. People are curious, and no doubt they'll want to explore it. See if we can go around it. Not so much. Not keen on crawling underneath stuff like that, because you just don't know if the limbs supporting it are rotten, whether they might give out. I mean, that's pretty substantial, but all the same. Well, this looks to be the end of it, for the time being at least. A little bit more further ahead. I mean, that's quite a distance we've walked through. All this windfall. And it just goes to show how many trees have fallen. Never a dull moment. Well, I say that, it's subjective. I mean, you might be finding this really tedious. We should probably have like a token explosion just to keep the pace up. Right, that's that. That brings us to fork number 2. And you might remember, this time we're going left. Back to climbing now, which is probably good because I was getting a little bit chilly just wandering along there. You can feel the wind starting to pick up now. We're getting a little bit more elevation as well. Up ahead, it won't be long before we'll be able to see the Simonside Hills as we come out of these trees. And then when we get on top of there, it's going to be, I'd imagine, probably pretty blowy. From here we're going to follow this fire road down this little hill towards a path which is on the left hand side of the trail. I'm going to take that path past the rocky outcrop up towards this ridge line where we're going to join another fire road, and then we're going to arrive at the base of the climb here and make the ascent up towards the summit cairn. Now that I've come out of the forest into more open terrain, I can really feel that the temperature's dropped. Got my gloves back on, hat back on, got a fleece in my bag, which will definitely be coming out when I get further up the hill. I could have probably made better provisions, like arranging a fortnight in a Mediterranean villa, but I think I'm going to have to put up with what I've got. Right, this is our little fork. This is the third one. I didn't mention it earlier on. That's the main forest road, believe it or not. It's really sandy underfoot, and on the left hand side here, which you can see is waymarked with a little red and white arrow there, is the path that's going to take us up towards the crag. I think this is going to get quite rocky. Yeah, pretty rocky. Lots of really loose rocks underfoot. I think you've got to be careful here not to twist an ankle. It's also a bit of a climb. And up ahead is the rocky outcrop that I mentioned. I'm going to pass through that. You see just off in the distance there, that's where we've come from. This is the beginning of that rocky outcrop. And there's a little bit more to come. The ground here is really quite loose. It's probably a good job that I'm not in my mid-40s and suffering with knee pain. Oh no, wait. Well, will you look at that. The pace of this adventure has just been kicked up another gear. Between the last fire road and the next, these posts can be used as a guide. Just past the rocky outcrop, and I've got a fork on the trail, and here I'm going to go left following the red and white way marker. Just arrived at the fire road on that ridge. This fire road will take you all the way across the Harwood Forest if you follow it, but you can see just there we have Simonside North Face. There's loads of climbing there. If you want to check it out, it's in the Northumberland climbing guide. Lots of really easy stuff like moderates and diffs. So if you're a beginner or you're looking for a relaxed day, it's probably a good spot, but the walk-in is quite extensive. It says here that 3 million years ago this area was the bed of a vast river delta on the equator. I'm not so sure. This is the part my old man knees have been dreading since I left the car park. This is the ascent up to the summit, where there's a cairn. It is steep, but thankfully it's short, not very sustained. So in a few minutes, we'll be all the way up the top. The ascent from the boulder behind me to the summit cairn above is, in essence, a big rocky staircase. The trail's been paved, presumably to help prevent soil erosion caused by the many walkers who pass through here each year. If you listen carefully, you might be able to hear a rhythmic clicking as I climb. It's not, as you might assume, the second hand of a high-quality Swiss timepiece that's a little too close to the camera's microphone, but rather a 44-year-old knee joint objecting to the now more rapid elevation gain. As you can tell, it's pretty windy up here. Believe it or not, there's actually a windscreen fitted to this camera to reduce wind noise, but it's clearly not enough. Fire road and then break off left up this climb and then just off to the south down there, that's Harwood Forest. This cairn marks the highest point on the route at 430 metres above sea level and around 200 metres above the starting point back at the car park. If you turn and look to the northwest, the Cheviot Hills can be made out on the horizon. It's just turned 8 o'clock, and like I said earlier, it's a Saturday, so later in the day this place is going to be probably pretty busy, but so far I've only seen one guy out running, one guy and his dog. And to me, this is one of the best times to come to places like this because you can see it without any distractions. I know it's a little bit selfish to want to have places like this to yourself. It's not really in the spirit of the outdoors, but it is nice just to see it when it is quiet. From here, I'll be following the path roughly southeast to the next landmark, which is the nearest outcrop you can see just ahead. Like the ascent, large sections of the Ridge Walk from the cairn right the way across to St Oswald's Way to the east have also been paved, and as a result the terrain here remains virtually unchanged year round. It's less than half a kilometre away, and it's a pretty significant feature on the ground, but it's not named on the map. I think this little pond at the foot of this rocky outcrop is one of the features that people stop and stare at most when they cross here. It's a little bit unexpected. As you can see, at this rocky outcrop the path leads around to the right, but it turns out that I'm a bit of a child. When I'm quite finished p***ing about, by myself in a fairly remote location, it's time to get moving again. Just off the back of that outcrop, there's another one. So we're going to make our way down this path, through that outcrop, up the other side, on the brow of this hill, down the far side of that hill, and away across to the east. It turns out that the bulk of this outcrop, which is called Old Stell Crag, is on the south side of the hill, just out of sight. This is another beautiful little spot as I'm coming down the lee side of this hill. Oh, it's noticeably more sheltered. Over there on that rock, just in the distance, is another GoPro, and it's set up on top of a kitchen timer so it can rotate through 360 degrees, and that's sat there doing a time lapse. So to fill the time in, I'm going to have a cup of tea. That time lapse took about 40 minutes. So in the time I was sitting there, I could have got quite cold. So when I arrived, I decided I was going to put a fleece on underneath my smock, and that's kept us nice and warm. If I'm honest, I probably could have done with an insulated jacket, just for that little bit extra warmth. But for today, the fleece was fine. Now I'm on the move again though, that's gone back in my bag because I want to keep it nice and dry and I don't want to get it soaked with sweat. It's beautiful up here, but it is windy, and you can probably tell that from the noise of the microphones, the audio, and that's in spite of having a windsock on the camera to protect the microphones from that noise. So a little tip, I've got my map in my pocket here so it's easily accessible, but it's also tethered and attached to the buttonhole on my pocket, so if the wind does take it out of my hand, it's not going to go flying off. It's starting to get a bit busier. There's a few people out in the forest below, a few people up on top of the hills here. I don't know if you'll be able to see, but I think where are we? There, on the top of that hill, is the mast that we passed earlier on. So we've doubled back, and I'm making my way back across to the east and eventually down to the car again. The next point of interest is Dove Crag, where there's another cairn, and that's less than a kilometre to the east of Oldstell Crag. I think people are starting to wake up now. Past about half a dozen other walkers, people with dogs, and I'm going to bet that when I get back to the car park it's going to be pretty full. I've passed the penultimate cairn, which is Dove Crag cairn, and I'm on the way across to the Beacon cairn, and that should be like the final summit, I suppose, before I descend back down to the car park. So I think I've probably got about 1.5 kilometres left to go. This is Beacon cairn. In Tudor times, a beacon was used to warn all that could see it of invading Scots. Here, the trail begins to descend, and I'm already within a kilometre of the finish line. I've walked here a number of times over the years, sometimes alone and sometimes with friends or with family, and I haven't yet got tired of it. I think that's largely because of the variety it offers, the contrast between the sheltered woodland and the open moors, and the imposing beauty of the crags and outcrops that pepper the route. Right now, the thing that's foremost in my mind is a substantial breakfast and some nice strong coffee, but there'll no doubt be a time in the not too distant future when I start to think about driving back out here.